with the management. For plural, it is activities, or it's an activity. So for plural, it is activities, and it is uncountable. Usually, activity is actually a countable verb. A thing that you do for interest or pleasure. So I want you to keep that in mind, that management is defined as an activity. And an activity is a verb, and it is something that you do for interest or pleasure. Also defined. Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Hi.
Linda Pandula has her hand up.
Okay. Do you have a question, Pandula? Pandula? Not? Okay, let's move on. So I want you to remember that the management is a noun and it is an activity. Then when we look at the definition of leadership, we see that leadership is the action of leading a group of people or an organization. It is the state or position of being a leader. So what is the difference that we pick up here immediately? The first thing that I notice is the word action. And action is actually the process of doing something in order to make something happen or to deal with a situation. And that is where it comes in, the difference between management and leadership. Management is an activity where leadership is an action. I love that. So nouns can be countable or uncountable. Countable nouns can be counted. So you can have an apple, or you can have 2 apples or 3 apples. And uncountable nouns cannot be counted. So if we pull that through to management and leadership, so management happens through several activities. These activities are performed and can actually be counted in a way. So how many things are you managing right now in this moment? So in this moment, I am managing many balls in the air, and I am doing it not necessarily for interest or pleasure, just kind of because I have to, but what I can count how many things I am managing at the moment and how many activities I am performing to manage my business portfolio. Opposite to that, leadership is who we are. It cannot be measured in numbers. It cannot be planned in activities. It simply flows through who we are. And similarly, it will just flow through the crisis. You won't have to tell. So a manager or a management style will need instruction when managing in a crisis or managing a crisis, where a leader will simply flow through it. It will I almost want to say it happens naturally because it is who we are. Just on that note, leadership can be taught. Okay, leaders are not born. So I did an ethics training last week and I said, there's no baby being born and they lead the other babies in the maternity ward and they're just like a born leader. That does not exist. Leadership is learned. Leadership is taken on. Leadership is a skill, but it is built on who we are. And that leadership of who we are is not necessarily something that you are born with leadership, but you are born with the ability to take accountability. You are born with the characteristics of a leader. But unless those characteristics are developed and those skills are constantly practiced and learned and developed, you're not going to be a leader. So I just want to clarify on that. Okay, so I love these definitions. And there's my little picture. So now I'm going to look at managing in a crisis versus leading through a crisis. And I'm going to put them side to side. So the first one that we will be looking at in this first column is the managing in a crisis. And then other side will be the leading through a crisis. So the first thing about managing in a crisis, it is now oriented. It is focused on what do I have to do now? What needs to happen now? What is the problem that needs to be solved now? So that is present orientated, without any consideration really for how this present action or present activity is going to affect the future, versus leading through a crisis, which is future oriented. That focuses on this decision or this activity that I'm doing now. How is this going to impact post-crisis? When managing in, when you are running around, I almost want to say like a headless chicken in the middle of a crisis, it means you don't have a plan. You are just focusing on beating this crisis right now. There is no plan. We're leading through a crisis. You will be following a pre-existing plan because leaders would have already planned for this in the future or for future crises. Managing in a crisis can be chaotic because it is where do I take and where do I leave and who's doing what and whose responsibility is this and whose responsibility is that, on top of, and yes, I hear somebody. Okay, on top of an already full portfolio. So you have your normal day-to-day activities or day-to-day work and day-to-day business, which keeps you busy the whole day. And then you go home and you do your home stuff and you're running your household, and that is day-to-day things. And all of those things don't disappear when the crisis hits. So unless there is a plan, it will be chaotic. But because there's a plan when you are leading through a crisis, it is calm. Everybody knows what's expected of them. Everybody knows what's happening. You know what you are doing. You are simply following steps that have been predetermined. Because remember, leading through the crisis, you already know everything's going to be okay. You are not looking at the chaos and focusing on the chaos right now. You are already just navigating through on a pre-existing plan. Managing in a crisis brings a lot of uncertainty, which always comes with chaos, while leading through a crisis brings trust. If you are a leader leading your team through a crisis, your calmness, your ability to show that you are in control, your leadership skills will cultivate trust within your team. So when you are delegating, they trust that you know where you are going. Because you are calm, you can build that trust, and they will also, your team will also experience that calmness because they know you've got them. Managing in, so this is a surprising one because managing in brings high performance. Everybody's just like performing all over the place and you're up and running and everybody's like busy and performing, and you're there and you're in the middle of this and it looks like such high performance. But high functioning or high performing anxiety is not a positive thing. So we need to be careful to not confuse high performance with, when we are leading, consistency. Because consistency is when you are consistently doing what you are supposed to be doing, when you are supposed to be doing it, and in a moment of crisis, you don't need to escalate the performance because you've already got your plan in place. So everybody just falls into your I almost want to say like your machine of crisis and leading through the crisis. Crisis leadership, let's call it crisis leadership. Managing in a crisis is busy. Everybody is busy because remember, we are now piling this crisis management on top of our already full portfolio, on top of everything else that is already happening in our lives. And that creates busyness. But busyness does not equal effectiveness. So when we are leading through a crisis, we are effective. What we are doing now, we are not. So I want to take your attention back to activity versus action. So busy is I'm busy with a range of activities, but I'm not really getting anywhere necessarily. Where when I'm leading through a crisis, I am taking deliberate actions. I am making deliberate decisions and taking deliberate actions to get somewhere, to get something done. And that is effective. The positive side of this is that managing in a crisis without a plan can be an excellent learning opportunity. And I just also want to point out that leading through a crisis does not mean you are not going to have any of these managing in a crisis scenarios, because there will always be unforeseen circumstances. So even leading through the crisis, you will sometimes find this but now this thing happened and my plan doesn't work for this. So my plan B doesn't work for this. My plan C doesn't work for this, because not everything, you cannot plan 100% for everything. So there will be sometimes a measure of chaos. There will be some uncertainty. There will be some busyness while everybody's finding their feet. But that is where the calm and the trust and the consistency can kick in. Okay, so the learning opportunity within this managing of a crisis is you build resources. Okay, you start to find out like, okay, this is the resource that I have. These are the, let's say, a manual that I'm writing, or a process that I'm putting in place, or communication. So for instance, if I take our own business at BDO, when COVID hit, which is like one of the big crises that we faced in the last 2 years, we immediately got up and running as online, so that our professional staff who had to go out and see clients, and we're a big company with a lot of people in the office, and I think it hit on the Saturday, or the first case was announced on the Friday or the Saturday, and by the Sunday, every person was able to work from home because of the resources. So our IT jumped, and it was Microsoft Teams and the cloud, and everybody's set up and everybody's got credit. So you build those resources. And here's the thing, you only have to do it once. And then that resource is there. You only need to then replenish it. Okay. You identify triggers. And this is especially true when you look at leading through, and especially places where you haven't really planned. So that's a very, very good place to identify triggers. And also in the high performance, you learn a lot about people when they are being put in this managing in a crisis. But we'll get to that in just a minute. You facilitate relationships. Okay, so this is where you have the opportunity to facilitate different teams working together, and different personalities, and different people that would not necessarily be working together gets the opportunity to form a team, and that can build professional relationships. I don't know a lot of things, but I do know people. Okay. And when this happens, it increases the trust. So everyone starts at managing in. I mean, if there is no reason for us to create this leadership plan, why would we? Because it's going to take up time for something that hasn't even happened yet. And it is in this first time when you, or not the first time, hopefully the first time, where you have to manage under these extremely stressful conditions within a crisis, that you will learn how to build your leadership plans and your contingency plans. And that is also how we increase trust. Then I did this little thing. I did this myself. I'm very proud of it. Okay, so leadership is all about planning for the future, knowing knowing where you are headed, and having a pretty good idea of when you plan on getting there. Second of all, leadership for me is a lot about respect. It is about respecting others. It's about respecting ourselves. It's about respecting our time. It is about respecting processes that are put in place, whether we agree with it or not. And that is where leadership comes in. People who might not agree with our processes, if we are good leaders, they will still respect that. I always have this saying, even with my trainees and my colleagues at the office, and in my personal life as well, I would always say, you don't have to understand my decision, you don't have to agree with my decision, but you will respect my decision. Which is also about my own self-respect. I trust and self-trust, which we will also get to, but I also do the reverse of that. I will say to somebody, I do not understand or agree with what you are doing, but I do respect that you are capable of making your own decisions. So respect is a very, very, it's the very foundation, I almost want to say, of human relationships. Then teamwork. And with teamwork, we get ideas. Listen to the ideas of everybody in the team. It's like I said, for myself, I don't know everything. Yes, I have a degree and I studied all of these wonderful things and these psychology models, and I really enjoy human interaction and the human brain. And I studied all of that 5 years ago. That does not mean that I know the latest developments. Yes, I do my training and I keep up with my CPD, and I try to keep up with the latest developments. But the training available to me is not necessarily the latest textbooks or the latest university teachings. And I am, hi. Okay, so I am 36 and I do not have the same mindset as somebody who is 20 years old. I have an older mindset. I have okay, I'm actually 36 going on 60, so I kind of have a boomer mindset, but getting the ideas from the younger generations, it's so fresh and it's so new, and that is how you will also communicate and communicate effectively, especially across different age groups and different demographics. Okay, so teamwork and listen to everybody's ideas and be ready. Even if you are not ready for the crisis, no, even if you're not ready for any specific crisis, to be ready for crisis. And that means you've got your processes in place, you've got your strong relationships, you have got your trust, you have got your team. And you know what you are responsible for. So you'll see how I'm just running down the list here. You know what you are responsible for. Your team knows what they are responsible for. And everybody is able to just come to the table. And then a big thing to me is also ethical. I spoke a lot about this in my last ethics training session, where I spoke about ethical leadership being, for me personally, doing the right thing Yeah, doing the right thing, even if it is at great cost to yourself. Okay, so what is the right thing? For me, it is doing the best thing for the most people, even if I'm not included in that most, even if it's not the best for me. And as a team leader, as a manager myself, one of my top priorities is to protect those that I have been entrusted with leading. Okay. And then we've got action. So leadership is about taking action, deliberate action to get something done, and being prepared. And with prepared, we'll get to that later as well. I get so excited. Okay, so being prepared for me is no matter what you throw at me. It's not as much as being prepared for a specific scenario or a specific situation, as much as it is being emotionally intelligent, having self-control, being self-aware, understanding my own strengths and my own weaknesses, as well as my team's strengths and weaknesses. And that is how I prepare for anything you might throw at me. Okay. I did a lot of research. I actually subscribed to the I don't know what you would call it, like a website or a book or something, um, during the lockdown last year, and they write the most amazing articles. So I would definitely recommend anyone to subscribe. We'll get to the next slide. Does anyone have any input or questions or anything on this slide that we just finished or up to now? Not. Okay, so we are good. Okay, so the Harvard Business Review. So it's HBR, and I love their articles. So this is just a summary of an article that I read recently in preparation for this training. Actually, not really in preparation for this training, but I revisited it because I read up a lot about crisis and problem solving, and I'm very solution oriented. So I will go and get that problem behind the mountain, and then I will bring it here, and then I will solve it for you, and then I'll just put it on the shelf until it's ready. Okay. Replete with both complexity and change, crises require, remember, pay attention to the words. This is straight from the Business Review article. Executives to both lead and manage effectively. But more often than not, leaders tend to focus their efforts on management, chaotic. Okay, it is in the moment, it is focused on now, rather than leadership, which is future oriented. The most effective leaders in crises ensure that someone else is managing the present is managing the present while focusing their attention on leading beyond the crisis towards a more promising future. Does that not just get like your blood pumping, and you almost get excited to practice this in the next crisis? Okay. The authors of the article identified four traps. Sorry, somebody's mic is unmuted and they're getting notifications in my ear. The article authors identified four traps that most leaders fall into. The first one is the narrow view. So the human brain is programmed to narrow its focus in the face of a threat. It is basically a survival mechanism. So if any of the candidates here today attended our EQ training, this is all about your nervous system and like your body going into survival mode. Okay, and that is tunnel vision. I'm just focused on this one thing. The trap is that your field of vision becomes restricted to the now, the immediate foreground. You can't see beyond. So that is where the management becomes a struggle. But when when you are a leader, you need to intentionally pull back and open your mind to not only look into what's coming, but also where you are realistically and where you come from. So you can understand where this crisis comes from, where we are in it currently now, and how we are going to navigate and lead through it. Okay. It is called meta leadership, which is taking a broad, holistic view of both the challenges and the opportunities. And properly focused meta leadership fosters well-directed management. Oh, I love that. The second track is getting seduced by managing. Okay, so this has happened to me. I have actually risen up through the BDO organization in a single industry. So back in the day when I started at BDO, I just finished my degree and my honors, and I was appointed as the personal assistant to 7 audit partners. And let me tell you, it was dealing with the workload or the work aspect and the personal aspect and the family aspect and managing 7 calendars and my own life and having a teenager, being in a new country because I just moved to Namibia with my husband, starting a new job, new schools, everything. And I was still working for the university where I studied. It was just crisis on crisis on crisis. And it was thrilling. It was proving to myself that I'm good at running things. But here's the thing. I kept going back to the same point. So I was just trapped in this cycle of crisis solving, crisis solving, crisis solving. And the decisions that I made and the things that I did was never or were never effective in the future. But once I almost want to say like matured into the new roles, it became a thing of seeing the long view as opposed to managing the present. And it became an anticipation. And the moment I started doing that and getting to know the people, so this whole management crisis thing was very short lived. I just want to also add that it was like 4 or 5 months. Yeah, it wasn't like years. And once I started to take the long view and getting to know the people in my life, I got to know all the partners on a personal level. I got to know the managers on a more personal level, seeing who they are as human beings. And I was able to anticipate what their needs would be. I was able to anticipate what comes next and what will be needed next week and what would the expectation on me be next month. And that brought a calmness, and that is how I built those leadership skills. And when COVID hit, which I think is almost, no, I'm certain, it was the first real crisis that myself and our management team was hit with. And I was able to effectively step into the role as project leader and just leading all of our teams with the obviously with my management team through the crisis of COVID, and it inspired calmness. Okay, we need to delegate. Okay, so this is again getting seduced. We're still with getting seduced with management. I can talk all day about being seduced by management because, man, it is thrilling to be busy. But nobody, no, not nobody, some people do. I question those people. But very few good leaders are impressed by busyness. Very few good leaders are trust somebody who's just busy all the time. Okay? But when you stop being busy and you start leading, that is when you can delegate and show your colleagues and your teams that you trust them to make tough decisions while you step back into a supportive role and you guide them based on your experience while resisting the temptation to take over, because the temptation will come, because inherently as humans we always think we could have done it better. But this is a time to step back, especially in a crisis, because that is also the best learning space. Okay. The third trap is over centralizing the response. Risk I can't say that word. Risk increases during a crisis because of all the uncertainty. And the trap with management or leadership in this crisis is trying to control everything. When you are delegating, you are creating new layers of approval for minor decisions, or major decisions, but let's just go with the minor decisions for now. You are used to, as a manager, right? As a busy manager, you are in control and you are just doing activities and running the business. And you are used to making the decisions. Okay? And then suddenly you start delegating because now, we're moving into a leadership role. And it can almost be, sorry, I'm thinking in between because I'm just realizing all these new things while I'm busy speaking and giving this presentation. The organization becomes less responsive and frustration grows, especially when you are trying to control everything. Have you ever felt like somebody asks you something, or your boss, let's go with your boss, asks you something and you literally look at them going like, are you seriously questioning me on this now? And as this frustration grows of being the boss trying to be in control, and the frustration grows within your team, performance and effectivity is going to go down because they don't feel trusted. But the solution to this, okay, is to seek order rather than control. So when we have order, it means that people know what is expected of them. They also know what they can expect of others. And that is where the relationships matter. That is why having healthy professional relationships or healthy personal relationships are so important. Because that means I know what is expected of me, and I also know what I can expect of you. And as leaders, we need to acknowledge that we cannot control everything. Oh my, this is hard. Even for me, do not for one moment think I am sitting here just preaching, because as I even wrote this session, I need somebody to give me this training, because I'm still sometimes such a micromanager, and especially in crises, but that breaks down morale. Okay, so a lot of what I'm teaching here is also from personal experience. So please don't get the idea that there's this curtain between us. One thing that we need to do is to determine, and this is as leaders, determine which decisions only we can make. If there is a decision that only you can make, then you make that. But if it is a decision that somebody else can make, then delegate it. When we are delegating, we need to establish clear guiding values and principles. And at the same time, again, resisting the temptation to just do it ourselves. Because I'm also the person that will give you something to do, and then you won't do it as well as I think I would be able to do it. So let's, for instance, take COVID, right? So one of the things that, and this didn't actually happen, I'm just using it as an example. So one of the things that we have a dream team, which consists of 3 people, so it's myself, Nicole, and one of our IT specialists. We are on this dream team, and we are basically responsible for the culture of the firm and all of that. And during COVID, one of the plans that we as the dream team came up with was, especially for building the culture and the human relationships, was to make sure everyone knew that they were being taken care of. So Nicole did a list, and every day we each had a list of people that we had to contact. Okay? And it was like, let's make it very personal. So you had to literally type a personal message to each of them. Let's say, for instance, Rajin, now I said his name, our IT specialist. Let's say, for instance, our IT specialist didn't have the capacity to sit and type, because he's an IT specialist, working in COVID, where everybody's working remotely. Didn't have the time to type a personalized message for everyone. Or me, I consider myself to be a very warm person, where IT technicians tend to be more introverts. It would have been easy to say, you know what, just leave it, I'll do it, it's fine. Like, let's just split it between me and Nicole. But excluding him would have been a very poor move in light of future engagements and future projects. It didn't happen. I'm just thinking of this now as an example. But what we did do was we did actually establish clear guiding values and principles to say, fine, everybody needs to be contacted at least once a day, and make it personal. Whether it is a meme that is personal to them, or one sentence, or a 3-page WhatsApp. That was resisting the temptation to do everything ourselves. Okay, so be careful not to over-centralize your response. And then lastly, the last trap is forgetting the human factor. It may seem obvious, but a lot of obvious things we tend to overlook because it's so obvious. Have you ever looked at something and you're like, how did I even miss that? Crises are crises because they affect people. If it didn't affect anyone, why would it matter? Leaders can sometimes fall into the trap of seeing the crisis. So I'm going to come back to COVID again. When COVID hit, did we see all the business we were going to lose? Or did we see we need to take care of our people in spite of all the business that we are going to lose? Because yes, business is important, but without the people, we'll lose the business anyway. And if our people are working harder and willing to commit even further and really pull this wagon through the ditch, then the business won't suffer as much. It makes sense. Ooh, sorry, what did I do there? So, sorry, just give me 1 second. organization, so let's say your business or your company or your team exist because you cannot achieve your objectives by yourself. And the solution to this trap is to unite people in their efforts and their goals as valued members of a cohesive team. And it all starts with everybody knowing what is expected of them and knowing what they can expect of each other. Why does this keep happening? Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a moment if anyone has any questions, comments, nothing so far. Okay.
Hello, I have a question.
Oh, hi. Yes.
Oh, what can happen? What if you find that the leader or the boss that you have maybe don't want to be corrected? When you correct them, they take that issue personal, and it is an issue that maybe you're addressing on a crisis in an office.
Okay. Um, I don't really have enough background to, but if it is simply a leader who refuses to take any form of direction or correction, then you have a manager and not a leader. And then you have to deal with them as a manager and not as a leader. So that would basically be just keeping your head down and doing whatever you need to do to make sure that your side, it's also another thing I always say is keep your side clean. It is keeping your side clean. And when somebody cannot be corrected or hear somebody else's reasoning, then you are dealing with a manager. And a manager likes to manage. And unfortunately, the challenge with that is unless there is somebody that you can go to over that person's head very respectfully, because you are keeping your side clean, the best would be to just do what you need to do when you need to do it. Because we cannot control a manager, we cannot control a leader. We can only control what we do. So, in that sense, the advice that I would give you is to focus on what you need to do when you need to do it and do it to the best of your abilities. And then you work so hard that you become the leader, not the manager, that you become the leader of that manager. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
Also ask something.
Yes.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
I just want to go back to the first part where you mentioned about is it if you could just go back on the slide. First, is it a narrow view? Um,
The narrow view, yes.
Taking a narrow view. Yes, I believe this probably has to do with being proactive as well, but it can often be a bit tricky. So if you would give an advice to a leader as to how to enlarge this view, how to ensure that you actually do not fall into that trap. You somehow touched on it a bit, but just a bit of a more practical example to ensure that you don't fall in the trap of having a narrow view.
Okay. Um, sorry. So basically, that would be the narrow view, or not falling into the trap of the narrow view would have a lot to do with emotional intelligence, because it is also our how we survive. It is literally how your so it's called your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is the one that gets you going. It is the one that he gets you into action. It is your pupils dilating and your heart rate raising and your blood pressure going up, and it is propelling you into action. And then once the crisis or the danger has passed, your parasympathetic nervous system will kick in, and that is where you start calming down and your heart rate returns to normal and everything like normalizes. And being able to not fall into the trap of taking the narrow view would have a lot to do with understanding how your body works. Because like we said, it is actually, it is actually a protection mechanism. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism designed for self-protection. So to be aware of that is already the first step. And that is what this training is also all about. So now the next time you are in a crisis, I would say stop. Take that moment to stop and ask yourself, am I taking the narrow view or am I seeing the holistic picture? And it is, remember what we said the solution was? It is leaders need to intentionally pull back. And that is a decision that we make. And that comes with self-awareness and understanding what our physical reaction is within the crisis. And making an intentional decision to pull back and opening ourselves up for the holistic view. So to answer your question, not taking the narrow view needs to be a decision, because taking the narrow view is what will automatically happen. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Excuse me?
Yes, yes. I'm saying
Okay.
thank you. It's well answered.
You are welcome. Okay. When you are not prepared, how to manage your crisis. Okay, so this is, we haven't set up leadership, we are just like in this moment. So what do? The first thing you do is you assemble a crisis management team. That's the first thing you do. You act deliberately. Do not react chaotically. I always say when we were doing the COVID responses, or if we found like out about a positive case or something, I would always say we are not reacting, we are responding and acting deliberately. So respond to the crisis and take deliberate action, but do not react chaotically, because reacting will bring fear and chaos and uncertainty. So act deliberately. Analyze. Okay, so how do you do that? Sorry, how do you act deliberately? You analyze the crisis and its components. So if we take COVID, for instance, the crisis was now we are all the lockdown. Now we are going into this lockdown. What is the component? So the components, we've got the business aspect, we've got the human aspect, we've got the quarantine aspect. From that, we've got the leave aspect, the salary aspect, the financial aspect. Then we've got the aspect of when we come back to work, like this is the longer view. We have the aspect of when we come back to work, there are parents with children, young children, older children, what is fair, what is not fair, and that is analyzing the crisis and all of its components. Okay, so I like to literally physically go and sit on the floor with an A1 or an A3 piece of paper in front of me and do a brain map or a brain dump where I do an analysis of basically everything that is going on now. And once you get it out of your head onto a physical drawing or something that you can tangibly see in front of you, you will be able to analyze it a lot more clearly and make sure that you don't miss any of the components. Once you've done that, identify the highest risk areas and the worst case scenarios. Okay? Then in your team, you listen to different ideas. Remember leadership, we always listen to everybody's ideas. And then we assign specific roles with clear objectives. So, Nicole, this is your role. This is what you will be doing on the task team. This is what you are responsible for. Duzan, this is your role. You are in charge of incident reporting. So everybody will tell you if there was any cases, and you need to do the incident report and communicate that to the partners. That is your role. The objective is so that the partners are not overwhelmed with 5 people giving them information all the time. You absorb it and you filter it and you give through the important information to the bosses. So IT, your role is to make sure that everybody has access to Teams and the licenses are renewed and this and this and this. The objective is everybody needs to be able to work remotely. So assign specific roles with clear objectives. Set up an effective communication strategy. Okay, something that is effective for everybody. So whether it be WhatsApp or Teams or on the cloud where we can just upload documents, how we can communicate those documents, set up an effective communication strategy. Because if everybody is just screaming orders at everybody and everybody's giving information across to everybody, it gets very confusing. Lead with compassion. Remember the human aspect. Lead with compassion. Most people did not wake up today going, oh, I think I'm going to ruin my leader's day. I think I'm just going to be like a horrible person to work with. Everybody's going through things. So lead with, I almost want to say lead from compassion, not with, but lead with compassion, but lead from a place of compassion. Have a plan B. Have a plan C. Have a plan D. Have 26 plans if that is what makes you feel calm as the leader. Because everybody is going to be looking at you in this crisis. And then, lastly, learn from the experience. Practical guide to building a leadership team, a crisis leadership team. So this is for future, to build your team and have them in place. So at our firm, you can see it's the same people. Whenever, I almost said a bad word, whenever the crisis goes down, it is the same people that are contacted. Okay, so as a leader, know the strengths of your team and use it to your business advantage. Who are your communicators and who are your action takers? So I'm very good at communicating, but I'm not so, I will, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I will talk about it, but I'm not necessarily, I'm that person that's going to feel overwhelmed and go take a nap. Nicole is the person who's going to feel overwhelmed and get stuff done and work until 2 in the morning, where I will be like, oh, but I'll tell everybody what we're doing. So you do it, and then I'll tell them what we're doing. Who are your communicators and who are your action takers? Assign roles in accordance with skills and designations. So a junior or an introvert may not be the best option for somebody to give instructions to management. Look at who's your respected team members already. Okay? Because nobody's going to listen. If a first year is telling a senior manager what to do, we might have a little bit of a problem. But if it is a supervisor telling a manager, like, these are the processes now, you have a better chance. Okay? And an introvert might not be able to do the conflict, or an extrovert might be too into having conflict. So assign roles in accordance with skills and designations. Make use of different departments. So within your crisis leadership team, use your IT, your marketing, your HR, your professional staff, your administrative staff. Every department can contribute. Understand the relationship dynamics. Okay, so in my previous training as well, I said a leader knows what's going on in their teams. They know the personal bickerings, the feuds, they know everything, the friendships, the work marriages, all of that. They don't get involved in it, but they do know about it. Okay? Anything that exists already in the relationship will be amplified through crisis. If it's a solid, strong relationship, the crisis will make it stronger and more solid. If it is a volatile, negative, toxic relationship full of stress and meanness and rage and regret, and that is what will be emphasized. It will become more so in a crisis. Have clear objectives and communicate effectively. What should each role player achieve and what is expected of them? Reinforce the human factor by creating a safe space for your frontline workers. Because you are leading from compassion, lead your leaders through commitment and mutual trust. Thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? Okay, so for those of you, some of you might have to leave already. So thank you very, very much for your time. I hope that you found some valuable insights in the last hour. And I will still be hanging around for maybe 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions, I will be here on the chat and online. For the rest of you, have a fantastic day and thank you so much for your time. We really enjoy having you in these sessions. Have a great day.